everyone.
Good morning.
Glad to see you here, all here. We have a diversity of topics, and we can move them around, or if you just want to dump one of them for right now. And the first two topics we have today, first one is the value of these Zoom meetings. And the second one is your organization, dojo, or personal rue, however you wish to define that. So do we want to start with the value of the Zoom meetings, or is that something way too hypothetical at this point in life?
I think it's.
I was reflecting on this question. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave. I'll add mine after yours.
Oh, I was going to be safe and add mine after yours.
All right, then I'm going to say it's a selective group, and it's called selection bias. The people who are here think it's valuable, so I'm not sure it's a valid question.
There you go, Dave. Now what are you going to say?
I like your thinking, Tom. Well, that's profound. I like how your mind works. I don't think that deeply. I'm kind of a shallow waiter here. When I reflected on this question, Sensei, what came to mind was my first sensei, my karate sensei, Lee Jacobs. And early on, he would say this in class, and from time to time he would remind us, and he would say that what you're learning here, it appears physical. Everyone needs to know that the largest percentage of what's happening here is not physical, it's mental, upwards of 90% perhaps. And so I look at the Zoom meetings, and I've looked at the way I've grown in my thinking by listening to minds far greater than my own, people with far more experience than my own, and writing notes. I've always been a note taker. It's how I retain. And so the information doesn't just fall on the mat. Some of it is going to stay on paper, which gets reviewed and actually remains in my mind. So the Zoom meetings have been enormously valuable to me, because I've literally done a about face on some of my thinking as a result of sensei who are far more knowledgeable than I.
I'll jump in real quick. So this is only my second one, so I'm brand new to this, but I am a karate sensei, and I've always believed that as sensei, whether it be karate, jujitsu, whatever, is that all we really have to rely on for support is each other. And when I found those Zoom meetings on YouTube and started looking at them, I thought this is exactly what that saying that I've been saying to my students mean. You know, everybody's supporting each other and everybody's helping each other. I am excited to be a part of this. And like I said, although it's only my second one, I think this is extremely valuable, and I will continue to come as long as you guys will have me.
You know, we haven't kicked anyone off yet.
I'm glad of that.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I started these simply was to have a means of different people, whether they be sensei or below sensei, to get together, exchange ideas, talk about them, some disagree, which is perfectly all right, and maybe get to know each other better. And so far, it's from my perception, it's been successful at that. And we get, you know, the turnout is usually dependent upon what's number one and number two on the topics list. I mean, that's a reality one has to face, and we've had some topics that were complete duds. But you know, that's the way it goes. That's the way life is. Anyway.
Sensei, on that note, I'd just like to say that there are times when I look at the topics and I am not enthused, show up anyways, and find out that it was one of the more valuable Zoom classes that I've attended. A lot of it has to do with who's there and who shares and what they share.
Right.
But it's like the day you get up and you don't feel like working out. You work out anyways, and you realize that was one of my more enjoyable, better workouts. I'm as surprised as anyone, but that's common. So the message there is, regardless of topic, if you got the time and the inclination, show up.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I found out being a classroom teacher was I could have the, lesson plan. This is what I gave up using lesson plans after my first year of teaching because they always got screwed up. But what I found is that you can start off with topic fairly mundane, and you can end up going off on some tangent that really is exciting and worthwhile for everyone. And I just learned from being a class teacher that if the class went in that direction, you went with the flow, because usually you could get back to what you wanted to cover, but in the process, you picked up a lot more participants because they realized you were listening to them. And that's how do you say? To me, listening to your students is a really important, and we're not going to go on that tangent right now, but listening to your students is probably one of the best ways of getting feedback as to whether what you're doing is, I don't want to say useful or not, or practical or not, or I don't know how to respond to that part, but if you're open to feedback, you'll be amazing. It's amazing what you can learn. And if I pick on Raymond here for a moment,
Sure.
because he's starting with the Jiu-Jitsu system, Budoshin, and had some questions about students seeing him as a sensei, even though with the Budoshin Jujitsu, he wants to be considered more as a student, and everyone's working together. And I ended up writing an editorial on, if you're a sensei, you're a sensei. And it's a much longer essay than that, but that's I don't want to call it a stigma, but that's something you'll just always have to deal with. And if you're receptive to learning, your students will help you.
Yeah.
And that's the important part. And I've learned, whether it be classroom teacher or jiu-jitsu sensei, I've learned amazing things from my students, different ways of doing things that were even better than what I originally did. And to me, that's one of the values of the Zoom meeting, because we get different ideas and different ways to do things, and then we sort them out by ourselves and say, okay, let me try this. And sometimes it works better than what I've done for the past 20 years. So to me, that's its value is I get new ideas, or it reinforces old ideas. Okay, anything else you want to?
If I could tag on to what you just said, coming from an engineering background, I used to hear a lot, if you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. And that was actually a sign of quality. And then, I think it was TQM 2000, Total Quality Management 2000, people said, we need constant improvement, or we're losing. We're not moving ahead. And how do you do that improvement? If 7 out of 10 white belts agree, is it a good idea? But if you can discuss it with other black belts, if 7 out of 10 black belts agree, chances are you're working in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. It's hard as a sensei sometimes to be persistent in what you're doing. or how you're teaching something. And I don't teach as my sensei did. We all teach differently. We teach what works best for us and hopefully for our students. If my sensei, if a student asked him a question, he would probably just say, "Watch me." And that was his standard response. And you learn to watch him. And eventually you'd pick up the details. But Seki very rarely explained anything. And that's just the way he was. And some sensei will explain things until hell freezes over, for lack of a better phrase. And that's, as you know, quality may be quality, but if you put students to sleep, if you put other people to sleep in the process, they're not going to recognize what you did. So it's a challenge to find the right way to teach, or the right things that work for you and your students.
Sensei, I'll throw one other thing in here. Whether you're on the mat or on the street, self-defense is primarily about building character. And these meetings have definitely contributed to character improvement, character development in participants. And that's undeniable.
I mean, that's one of the things we all, and if Raymond had a chance to read my massive editorial this morning, I mean, that's one of the things that came up, is that, we as sensei, we're teaching a martial art, but we're giving part of because we are sensei and we have certain responsibilities as sensei, we should be providing a positive example so they can build their life skills, positive life skills. And that's they'll pick up stuff from us, they'll pick up stuff from us whether or not we want to give it to them. That's one of the frustrating things about being said. They'll even mimic your mistakes sometimes. But okay, anything else you want to do with the value of the Zoom meetings, or anyone else have some input or thoughts? Or
I think if we go any further, we might head straight into self-aggrandizement. I think we ought to move on.
yeah, I think we need to. Yes. Okay. Yeah, there's a fine line between being a sensei and self-aggrandizement. It's like saying there's not much difference between being a sensei and inventing sliced toast. Anyway, okay, well, let's move on here. The second topic that came up today was your organization, dojo, or personal ru. Now the question is, what is it? What does it represent? What is its emphasis? Is it legitimate? Who should name a ru? What are the criteria for a ru? So does anybody want to take a stab at any of this, or? All of us can be right. You can all have different.
Now,
Excuse me here for a moment.
nobody else is going to jump in here. I'm gonna prod Scott Anderson, because we haven't gotten anything out of him today.
Gave you a great line about if you always do. But let me put it this way. Years ago, when I was taking a technical writing course, they made a big difference talking about dialect and idiolect. And dialect is where you are in the country, kind of in that region. but idiolect is how you actually speak in that region. So it can be you spent 2 years in Ireland, maybe you're in Canada, and now you're living in Appalachia. You're going to talk a little different. But if you go outside that area, someone's going to say, hey, are you from Appalachia? Or as Appalachians, you're going to say, you're not from around here, are you? So when you start talking about organization, dojo, or ryu, you're really reflecting like everybody that takes Kodokan Judo says proudly, I take Kodokan Judo. But when you go to somebody's dojo, you're getting their interpretation of Kodokan Judo. And that can vary from, are they an aggressive fighter by nature? Are they tall? Are they underpowered? Are they overpowered? There's a number of factors. The judo they're going to try to teach. A really good instructor is going to teach for better term, a pan judo that works for everybody. A bad instructor is going to teach, for want of a better word, is idiolect instead of the dialect. And even then, the dialect is a subset of the language. So if you look at English, most people in school learn basic English. That's an acronym for British American Standard and Composition. Is that a language out of its own? Hey, you get graded on it like it is. But if you're in certain parts of the world that don't do basic English but speak English, you're kind of at sea. So I think kind of like with Zoom calls, and 7 out of 10 black belts agree. If you have a group of like-minded people that are defining something, that's what you're doing. I mean, those are vague terms, but to me, Ryu seems like it can only apply to a Japanese art because it's a Japanese concept.
I think to reinforce that, one of the things I've found over the years is that and maybe this is, how do you say it? I'll say this with respect to jujitsu. I don't know how it applies to other martial arts per se. If you put a bunch of jujitsu brown and black belts together on the mat to train or work out, once they get past terminology in English or Japanese, I've run into French, German, Austrian, those Spanish. So even if we just stick with plain English, you get different names in Japanese and English for the same techniques. You get variations of techniques. And once you get beyond those two, whether you call them barriers or walls or whatever they are, it's amazing that jiu-jitsu can work out and train with each other with very few problems because they're all learning the same stuff. And I mean, that's where Seki said jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu. And some people will argue, and I'll even argue at times, but the basic techniques are all basically the same. And different sensei may have different organizations, or dojo may have different interpretations of them or do them slightly different ways. But you know, it's still the same art. I think one of the frustrating parts is when, and I've run across this, is when a black belt will say, well, this is the only way to do it, a technique, or this is the only way to do this technique because this is the way our organization does it. And going back to a lousy analogy, there are many ways to toast toast. Try doing it over a campfire.
I've done it. It's good.
Yeah, I mean, it is. You know, you just have to be a little careful.
I'll chip in here if I may.
Sure.
So I'm guessing that a lot of you probably have spent time in karate. So that this is from a karate point of view, but it's something that I discovered in the early 80s. I was heavily into the karate tournament scene, mostly the open tournaments. And we would have tournaments where there would be Goju-Ryu represented, Isshin-Ryu, Wado-Ryu, Shotokan, all these different karate styles were there. But I would watch them and I would watch them do their kata and I would watch them spar. And I realized that you can't tell one style from the other. They all look the same. Even in their kata, the kata might be called something and maybe it's a little different pattern, but all the movements were exactly the same. And that's when I kind of really started to come to the realization that there are really no styles of karate. Just like I hear sensei say there's no ryu in jiu-jitsu. That hit home with me because I observed the same thing with karate. So yeah, I'm a believer that, as a matter of fact, now, even though my belts, my rank is all in Goju-Ryu, I just call what I do karate. I don't even call it Goju-Ryu anymore. If people want to know what style I came from, I'll tell them, but I just don't see the need to distinguish between Ryu, especially in the arts that have their base in Okinawa. It's my opinion.
Because there's Okinawan karate too.
Yeah, yeah. And they all just took from each other.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, and there are one of the things I found when you put black belts of different quote unquote ryu together is that sometimes some ryu either disallow certain techniques or don't teach certain techniques. And once you get a group of brown and black belts working together, they start exchanging ideas. And I've seen it where it's upset that student's sensei because now they've learned something that isn't in their quote unquote system.
Mm-hmm.
And then the issue is, as a sensei, what do you do? So maybe one of you someone wants to react to that, you know, if
Sensei, as a sensei, I fold it in. I welcome it.
Yes.
Any limitations that I have as a self-defense practitioner, as a self-defense instructor, any of my limitations can quickly become my students' limitations.
Right.
So we earlier talked about being open-minded and being receptive. They bring something to class. It works. I like it. We're folding it in. It's become part of our quote ruse.
I do that to an extent too, because occasionally you will have a student who puts stuff. I've had students put basic moves together in ways I haven't seen them yet, and I found that rather by saying no, that's not going to work, you know, which is a cop-out response in my book, I'll say, can you teach it to the class? And
that's genius, Sensei. That's
what?
Pure genius. Pure genius.
And my perception is if some of the students in the class can do it, then it has legitimacy. If no one else can do it, that's their technique. Doesn't mean it's wrong or anything, but you know, but also what it does, and you're not trying to put the student on the spot. So if they raise that, like, no, I don't want to come up and show this technique to the whole class. It gives them a sense of, it improves their sense of self-confidence, which is one of the things we try and instill in our students into believing in themselves. And just by having them come up and teach that technique to the class, yes, maybe it might put you on the spot somewhat because you're the sensei. But on the other hand, one of your goals as a sensei is to help develop your students' sense of self-confidence. And if they're successful at putting this technique group of moves together and it works out at being successful and the class can do it, then they may try other things as well. And that's when your art becomes creative. And I used to have one, he actually made it up to brown belt. The other students referred to him as Sasquatch, short guy. But what he was so light and muscular, he could literally in 2 or 3 steps walk up a person and do scissors around their neck with his legs. He was phenomenal to watch. No one else could do it, but but he had this skill, and sometimes you have to work with the skills a person has. Because sometimes it's amazing what our students can do if we give them the freedom and support to do it without creating chaos and, oh, now there are 3,000 ways to do a hip throw, which none of us will ever learn. But so if do you think anyone should, and this becomes picky to a point because my sensei was this way, do you think anyone should be able to name a rule or call something a rule themselves?
I don't think you're going to stop people from doing it.
Okay, that's a good.
But, yeah, I look at that with a lot of skepticism when I see somebody's created their own rule. How many ways are there to throw a front punch, or to do a koshinagi, unless you stand on your head. And I think Bruce Lee said that unless you stand on your head and spin around 3 times first before you do it, it's not new, somebody's done it before.
Yeah. When Bill, decades ago, when Bill Fromm and I started teaching at the Burbank Y, we ended up with like a 6-month waiting list to get in the class, because it was a free class if you were a Y member. And people would just constantly ask us, what rule of jujitsu are you teaching? Seth would say, there are no rule. And so we went to him with the term Budoshin, which is to conduct yourself in an honorable and a respectable manner. We initially were asked, would we call this Budoshin Ru Jujitsu? And he said, no Ru. So by saying that, he inferred that, okay, Budoshin Jujitsu is okay, but Budoshin Ru Jujitsu is not. So that's why there's no Ru in Budoshin Jujitsu. We did not intend it to be a description of the physical aspect of the art, but the mental, aspect that as a martial artist, you have a responsibility to conduct yourself in a respectable manner. And he went with that. And
I see it as more of the family, not necessarily the Ru, but Budoshin is the family.
yeah, I mean, if I look at all the Budoshin sensei, I am sure I can find ways that they're teaching techniques differently than I did. But we all end up with the same technique. Okay. It's like there are different recipes to make a chocolate cake, but you're still going to end up with a chocolate cake. And that's one of the niceties, because in doing that, or what do you call that, in having that freedom or flexibility, we tend to learn different ways of doing the same things. And I may say to Dave, gee, that's a much better recipe for chocolate cake. Your cake tastes better than mine does. So I'm going to start making my chocolate cakes that way. Or it may be same thing for just a basic hip throw. And I know I've said this many times. One of the fastest ways I got my students to learn the hip throw, where the proper hip placement was your cleavage. I mean, their right thigh goes between your cleavage. And the kids came up with more blunt terms for that. But, once you get yourself in the correct physical position for any technique, it's going to work. And that's what I said. So you can have different terms for the same thing. You can have different, I don't know if anybody calls that explanation of how to do a hip throw. makes it a Budoshin Jujitsu hip throw or not. I would hope not, because otherwise I'm going to be the butt of some jokes.
No pun intended.
Gotta have some humor. Anyway, but anyway, so that's my position is that there are people that will call Budoshin Jiu-Jitsu a rube. My personal position is it's not my place to do that. Black belts that I have and other people, they'll make the decision, someday after I kick the bucket, maybe, okay, this terminology will continue. Or not. Who knows? But I think naming a rule is a sensei can do it. Okay, hunky dory. And as long as that particular dojo lasts, physical dojo lasts, the rule lasts. But I think it's up to their students and other practitioners to decide whether something really becomes a rule. Does it persist in spite of the person who and I won't even say I originated anything, because I haven't. And I don't think any of us really, in the martial arts, you really don't originate much of anything. You copy, you try to improve on it, you try to give it to your students in a way that they can use it. And or maybe is the teaching approach. And
Sensei, I'll jump in here. I for years on and off, for years I looked for a dojo where the ego was in check. The egos were in check. And when I went into dojos and found there wasn't room for me to learn because the egos were bouncing off the wall, I just left. I'm disgruntled and unimpressed. And when I found a karate dojo where the egos were healthy and in check, I was in. I was hooked. And then through a series of events, realizing that karate was going to, use of karate might, it's going to involve striking. It could involve lawsuits. I wanted something softer, and Budoshin Jujitsu came about. I spoke with you, and immediately I was taken with the fact that this man knows what he speaks of, and his ego is very much in check. It was refreshing. I didn't have to look any further, and it was the first place I looked for jiu-jitsu. So karate took a long time to find. Jiu-jitsu didn't take any time at all. But getting back to the original question, the rube, I think the reason, my observation, right or wrong, is that through the generations and the millennia, a lot of ruse have been born just out of ego. Now I'm really good at this. If I invent a ruse or call myself a ruse, then I can be called master and blah blah blah, and I can walk around with my thumbs tucked inside my black belt as I pontificate in front of the class. Well, that's very unimpressive. It's unimpressive. It just makes me want to leave the room. I want to know what I can learn from you, but I don't need you to put on a rooster show to do it. And so it's a massive turnoff. So like Raymond said earlier, when you hear the word "rue," it's like it makes me want to run the other way. We have a soothsayer among us named Thomas Salander, and for a couple decades, I have really respected the time that I've enjoyed on the mat with Thomas Salander, which hasn't been frequently enough. Thomas, you'd have some interesting insights on this, I'm betting. And so, can I throw you right up there, throw you out in front of everybody, and maybe get your insights?
I won't take any insult.
Throw me up there or under the bus? Well, I'm listening to this, and the question was, who should name a rule? And what we're talking about is who does name a rule. Anybody can, but who should? I can't answer that question. The three biggest ones that I'm aware of, Kano came up with a teaching curriculum So as far as I could tell, that he was naming his curriculum. Yeshiba kind of went off on a mystical quest, and Okazaka was coming up with something that was preservation. He wanted to, it was almost like a museum art. Uh, but so it makes sense in each of their cases. Okay, this is what it's going to be. If I want to do Danzanru, it's going to be, there's one way to do things, and that's the only way to do things. If I'm going to do uh, Shotokan, then not Shotokan, uh, Judo, it's there's a book that says if your hip is this far in between his cheeks, then it's going to be called this technique, and if it's 2 inches further in, it's going to be this other technique. I don't have any problem with that. I'm not a creative person. I'm not going to name a roux. I'm not going to create a roux. I want to delve into what it is, but the same thing is I'm not a jazz pianist. I play classical music. I've got a script in front of me. I may emphasize things a little differently than somebody else, but I'm not creative. A jazz pianist is going to go off there and just riff on things. Okay, well, that's fine. Uh, Jazz pianist is going to name something. I'm not. I'm going to follow somebody else's script. I guess that's what it comes down to. For me, it's the difference of what do I want? And I want to delve into something deeply. And I'm not the creative type. Somebody else wants to do that. Okay, fine. I think, George, you had it. They can name it whatever they want. But if it doesn't last after they're gone, it really didn't exist.
Yeah, I mean that's that's kind of a sad. I don't say, like, if it doesn't last after the person is gone, it doesn't, it really doesn't exist. Then that's important. I can't think of a better way of saying that, because that, it's kind of like, what did you leave the world, or did you leave the world anything?
Yeah.
And I forget who said it earlier, that it doesn't matter what style of karate it is, they're all basically doing the same thing. There may be variations. There are variations even within judo, and then some people will argue that combat judo is jujitsu, and some people will argue it isn't. In fact, I mean, I've read multi-page treatises on the correct spelling of jujitsu.
Yeah.
And then only recently, I think it was courtesy of Scott. Yeah, Scott. Scott gets me thinking a lot, which is why I really, why I like everyone here, because I enjoy people who make me think and challenge my thinking. And I'd always wondered what Zujitsu is, Zhuzhitsu. And I think it was Scott who mentioned that in the Cyrillic alphabet, there is no J, or no J sound. And so ZH makes the J sound. So now I understand what Zujitsu is. Zhuzhitsu, or all the other variations of jujitsu spelling this, starting it with the ZH. And so that's, it may be trivia, but I learned something, and that learning went beyond jujitsu per se. I probably now understand a little bit more about the Cyrillic alphabet, and because different languages pronounce the same letters differently, and I learned that from taking Spanish, which, in junior high and high school, and at that point it was all done written, and I bombed at that. I mean, I think my third semester, the teacher said, you either drop out or I'll fail you. So I dropped out. And but it's it goes back to, you can have different names or different pronunciations for the same thing, and it really doesn't matter, regardless of the art or the rule or whatever else you want to call it. My personal opinion is that there are more commonalities between martial artists than there are differences.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it's worthwhile trying to accentuate the differences. I mean, I know I do it sometimes, even with jujitsu. I mean, I'm not a quote unquote angel, so to speak. And we all have our opinions. But this exchange allows us to express our opinions without killing each other in the process.
I had another thought when it comes to Rue, if I may.
Sure.
As far as naming a Rue, I mean, I use Goju-Ryu a lot because that's my background, but I look at the 1930s when Choji Miyagi created Goju-Ryu and named it, and it's still alive today. It's all over the world. You know, you go to, there's a lot of Goju-Ryu dojos, but if you step into any of those dojos, there's a really solid chance that Goju-Ryu they're doing looks really nothing like the Goju-Ryu that Choji Miyagi started. I mean, you got your Goju Kai, you know, the Japanese version. You got your USA Goju, and then my former sensei Hanchi Angel created the Tenchi Goju, and there's all these differences along the past almost 100 years now. There's been all these changes and additions and subtractions to what Miyagi taught that it really doesn't look anything like that anymore. So I think the reality of that to me is that you can create a Ryu and you can name it, and if it's lucky enough to survive 100 years, it may not look anything like what you created.
Right. And even though, as I've stated before, there are some things that Seki did back in the 60s, 70s that today would be completely socially unacceptable. As students wouldn't tolerate. He was very verbally abusive to students. The higher you went in rank, the more you got harassed. And his attitude was, if your tiki, I would quote him, if your tiki gets upset, you have no business learning a martial art. And he lost a lot of his top belts because of that. So a lot of people could, but that was part of his training. And a lot of people couldn't let stuff go in one ear and out the other. And that to me is, maybe it's because of the way he quote unquote trained us. Or part of it may have been my dad, who, when I was a lot younger, because quote I was a redhead when I had hair, supposedly redheads have a bad temper, and he finally said to me one day, he says, if you hit first, to my brother, or he said to me, and I had a younger brother, is, if you hit him first, you're in trouble. If he hits you first, he's in trouble. And I learned not to hit first, because I didn't want to get in trouble. So I don't know which one had more of an effect on me, but we all know as martial artists that you really do have to let a lot of stuff go in one ear and out the other if you're going to maintain your self-control. And that's very hard for some people to do. And some people get on my case because I don't get upset easily. And I'm sure the same applies to most of you. You know, it's how do you say, if you have a certain, lack of a better phrase, if you have a certain skill or power, you also have a responsibility to control it. And that's, I mean, a couple of years ago, I had a student came in from, I don't know, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or MMA. He could not relax. And he eventually left us because I simply said, you've got to stop using muscle. because you're going to injure yourself or someone else. And that was a matter of him establishing self-control. So, I guess some Ryu emphasize self-control, others maybe don't. But as a sensei, we're supposed to be perfect. Anyway, which really isn't true, but it looks good. Sounds good. Okay. Next topic. I don't know how many of you have read the Budoshin Jujitsu syllabus clarification that came out in November or late last year. If you read it, raise your hand. If you haven't read it, don't raise your hand. Okay. The reason for that, and then we can discuss it from there. The reason from that is that there were different assumptions on what was required for various belt promotions. Student handbook has one criteria. There's the 8 videos that present far more than what's required on any one belt exam. There's a sensei's standards criteria. There is what's in the books. I mean, there are so many different sources of information. It's very challenging for students at times to figure out what's required of me. And I know as a teacher, one of your responsibilities is students need a clear path, or you need to give them as clear a path as possible. And so ultimately this came about, and I really want to thank Dave and Michael Langwich for helping me clear up some of this stuff. And what it comes down to is essentially the student or Black Belt handbook is the #1 guide, regardless of what's in the video. I'll go by what's in the student or Black Belt handbook, because that you have to have. If you have an instructional program, you have to have some standard, not for you, but for your students' benefit, because they need some sense of security, because they're learning all this weird stuff from you. And beyond that, the sensei may have a way of teaching a particular technique that seems to work best, and that may, be superior over what's in the student handbook. In essence, the sensei has the last word. Your sensei has the last word. So that was the, and am I correct, Dave? That was the intent of the syllabus clarification.
I would say so for sure.
Yeah, and
It all makes sense.
I don't know if the syllabus clarification helped anything. Or some people, and I know I'll do it too. So if you did this, oh, that looks interesting, I'll add this to my stack of stuff to read someday when I have nothing else to do with my life. And I used to do that a lot as a teacher. We get announcements and bulletins all the time, and I just put them in a big stack. And once a month or so, I just take the stack, and I shouldn't say this, I'd put them in trash because no one ever followed through on it. And I can't be sure that anyone will follow through on this either, but I felt it was something that I needed to do, and Dave and Michael were helpful in clearing up some of the, discrepancies in what I had written, and we ended up with a better product. So That's why it had to be done, because basically there were just too many variables floating around. And I don't know whether you've run into that issue if you're a sensei of Budoshin Jujitsu or a different rule of a different martial art. I mean, what do you do when you encounter variables and belt rank requirements theoretically from the same system?
Can I jump in on that one?
Sure.
Because we did run into that when I first started. So the only material that I was aware of when we started were your books. And the criteria for advancement in the back of the books was that's what we went by. But then the student handbook, when I became aware of that, that became actually much more dynamic because you do updates to that. We didn't get updates on the books. We got updates on the student handbook. I think your description is kind of how long does it take for something to change? And the books take a really long time to change unless you're going to rewrite the basics. The student handbook, every couple of years we get a revision, and then whatever your sensei is saying, that could change from one night to the next. As long as what the sensei is teaching isn't varying too much from what the student handbook is saying, I'm comfortable with that. I don't fault I don't fault the books. It was just a snapshot in time when you wrote those, and then the most important material was what are the techniques? How do you do them? And then the student handbook says, let's regroup these a little bit differently. And while those are also snapshots, they're much more frequently updated. I think that's the important part to remember. And I've had students come up to me and say, well, look in the back of this book, and this is what it says I need to be able to do. And I said, yeah, but you're out of date. Look at the techniques, read the techniques. Don't worry about what's in the back of the book. There's much more current material for that. And I haven't had too much pushback from that. I had one student that really started to go into judo and really liked the structure of judo and the naming in judo and went off on that tangent. But other than that, I tried to stick to the curriculum as much as possible. Periodically, I'd get together with you and realize, oh, you don't do that technique the way you taught it to me a few years ago. And okay, and we talk about that. And, yeah, okay, that makes sense. I can see the difference there.
Yeah. How do you say it? I think as we all get more experienced in a particular art, it changes how we execute techniques, and we may execute them differently than when we first learned them. I don't know if the original basic techniques book has, I don't know if it has the belt exams in it or not. I think at that time we may not have had a blue belt or fifth Q yet. And that didn't come about until I think the mid-70s somewhere, because it used to be green, purple, brown, okay? Three degrees of brown. And the students had to take the purple belt exam 2, 3, 4 times before they pass. It was just too comprehensive or difficult. And so I turned to I went to one of my black belts, and I said, let's pick a lower rank student, let's pick a purple belt. So I teamed him up with a purple belt, and I said, I'd like you to create a 4th Q exam, something between, a 5th Q exam, something between green belt and purple belt that will still allow for the progress and get the student to the same point by the time they take the purple belt test, but they need something in between, because what we have now is not working. And we were losing most of our students at that point between between sixth Q and fourth Q, because there was no fifth Q. And so they came up with a fifth Q, we called it blue belt, and it worked. One of the things they also did, which was surprising to me, was now by the time a person took and passed the purple belt exam, they had actually picked up a few more techniques than what had originally just been in the purple belt exam. So now by the time they got to purple belt, they were actually more skilled than they were before. So, and that's kind of stuck for the past 50 years now. But what I'm trying to say is sometimes you have to look at what are you teaching and what are you requiring, and is it realistic? And if there are problems, we all want our students to achieve. We all want them to become black belts. We all want them to become sensei. We all want them to open up their own dojo, have thousands of students, and the world continues to turn. Okay. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Okay. Much to our personal frustrations. And so you have to at times go back and look at, what am I requiring? Are there any changes I can make that will make the learning process more successful for the students? Because that's your goal. You want your students to succeed. And so I've known some sensei that have moved some of the belt requirements around. I can't say they're wrong, because by the time they get to black belt, all the black belts are in the same place. So maybe it comes down to, maybe a RU comes down to, or syllabus clarification comes down to, forgot what it got, but I lost it in my mind now. It's not what you do, it's how you do it.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
So I'm brand new. I'm working on my 6th Q material right now via the home study. And I've got not all the sources, but I've got the handbook, I've got the videos, I've got Sensei Kirby's books, I've got all that. So I had to make sense of it all when I got all this, as far as what's required. And I think the syllabus clarification was very excellent, when it came to that. So there was no question about what I had to do for my MAT exam. But I went back and I looked at the videos, and everything's pretty much cataloged in the student handbook anyway, as far as the sequence of the techniques in the videos. So I had that. I had what the handbook said was required, and then I had the back of the basics books, what it said was required, and I just compared them all. And even though there's some things that weren't required via the handbook, they were at my thought was, well, they were at one time. So I'm going to make this list, and all these lists are pretty much the same anyway, maybe a little bit of difference. But my thought is that I want to learn and I want to train all of it, not just what's required via the student handbook. What was required before with the basics list and the back of the book. So that's my thought going forward, right or wrong, was that's kind of how I approached it. Just take the time to do the work and write all this out and compare it and see what's different, what's not. Go that way.
Yeah. One thing, just for your own, and I don't know whether I mentioned it to you or not in any of our correspondence, is that if you get all the stuff on the video down, you will probably technique-wise be fairly close to Nida. Although that was not the plan when I did the videos.
Well,
I didn't realize that until after they came out and I started looking at it. I said,
my next thought was, once I do my MAT exam for my 6th Q, is I'm going to do the same thing for blue belt, go through and look at all the requirements and compare them all and to figure out a curriculum or a plan going forward based on all of those resources combined.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate what you're doing because you're probably proceeding in a very logical manner that's going to really increase your chances of success with all this instructional materials. And that's very frustrating for some people that get into the program to do, because they'll look at me and say, where do I find this technique? I said, what if you go to page so-and-so of the handbook? And part of the reason for the handbook is because when I originally started teaching in the classroom, I had a principal who didn't like what he called talking heads. And a talking head is a teacher that stands in the front of the classroom the whole hour and talks. He wanted people who would mingle with the kids and work with them on an individual basis. And yeah, maybe there might be a 10 or 15-minute presentation, but that's it. And one of the things I learned from my kids after a few years was, one of them said to me one day, why don't you put all these instructions for different projects, et cetera, or assignments into a handbook? This is somewhere like a 13-year-old kid, and give it out to us at the beginning of the year. And then you won't have to spend all this time explaining stuff over and over again in the classroom. Duh. This is why I say you have to listen to your students. Okay. I did that. I said, okay, I'll try it. First complaint came from an administrator. The next year, he said, you're using too much paper at the beginning of the year. Or the Xerox machine did whatever. And I said, yes, but I won't use any paper for the rest of the year. Watch me. And that's what happened. So, but what I found was that once the kids got the hang of the handbook, I could work with more kids individually and help them succeed than I could if I was up in front of the classroom trying to explain all this stuff over and over again, because they had it in front of them in print. And also at the end of the year, which is something you might do with your students once in a great while, is have them evaluate your teaching or have them evaluate your materials. And if they've learned to trust you and and you've allowed them to be honest with you, they will come up with some amazing feedback. Some of it will be bad, some of it will be good, but you can learn from that. And so the handbook would, every year or two, I'd make revisions just to clear up stuff that didn't, because there'd be consistent problems that they would find in the handbook, right? Okay, this needs to be fixed. And that's why there's so much quote unquote detail in the student handbook. Oh, if you want to find this technique, these are the three places in the books, in the videos, in the where you can find it. And they say, oh, I didn't see that. I said, okay, now you know where it is. The world turns. But that's it made teaching a lot easier for me. So I don't know. Maybe that's the syllabus was maybe just part of that process that ultimately I had to do, and fortunately Dave and Michael cleaned it up for me because they said it a lot more clearly than I did. So I want to thank you.
Add something to that, George. You did something that I've never seen from another teacher. So for a number of years at camp, there was a section where we went back and worked through the big book, where we were saying, okay, let's follow the directions that are in the big book and try to do this technique. And who's got a third arm growing out of their chest? And that helped because you made revisions and it was, okay, let's go back, and people who don't know what you're thinking in your head, trying to read your directions, how does it work? Oh, you didn't understand that. Let's revise that. I didn't make myself clear. Let's revise that. That was useful. And I gotta say, that's only time I've seen that out of any of the instructors I've ever had, professionally in martial arts and even in piano. I really did appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate the feedback as well, because it showed, and there ended up being, which I've mentioned a number of times, I think maybe mentioned it at camp, there are some consistent mistakes in the big book, which is another source. And that is, sometimes if a technique doesn't work, change left to right,
Yeah.
change forward to backwards, change backwards to forward, all because sometimes instead of pivot your left foot back, maybe you should pivot your right foot back. Because there were and probably still are mistakes in the big book. And part of using, I'm going to say this, Jen, part of using any source for information on how to do something, you have to get into the author's thinking.
Yeah.
Because there may be things that aren't really said, but they're meant by inference. And inference is what gets us all into trouble at times.
Sensei, that whole process was a remarkable example of humility as well.
Yes.
You demonstrated great humility by saying, hey, this is my work. We can improve on it. Help me out.
Yeah, it's something. Yeah, I mean, I've not only as a sense, I've seen other sensei, I've seen other teachers saying, this is the way it is. You have to do it this way. Whether they be right or wrong is irrelevant. It has to be done their way. And that's, as Dave said, that's when you turn and walk out of the dojo. I think in any profession, I mean, as an adult, you have to realize there are times when you are wrong. And you have to be willing to admit it and try to make corrections that will work properly. And that's a real hard thing for some people to do. Because their ego gets involved. Their self-image gets involved. All these other, what do you call it? I can't think of the term. Someone help me here. I'm looking for a word. Got all these
Concepts?
what?
Concepts?
Concepts or personal perceptions that are coming under challenge, and you have to be willing to accept them and not see it as a personal insult to you. And I'm not perfect. I have a long way to go before I'm perfect at this. And this is how I can improve on something, or this is how I can make something better, rather than saying this is the way it is. I mean, I've had teachers that said this is the way it is, and all you can do is say, okay. But you've learned. Go ahead, Dave.
I wanted to throw something else in here. There's a couple times I've needed to borrow my bride's laptop to participate in class, so my name becomes Marie Clark. We look over at Ned. I suffer your humility, Ned, because I felt like I was displaying some type of gender dysphoria that did not exist. But I'd like to invite Ned to join in and weigh in here, because he's suspiciously quiet over there, and I know he holds a wealth of knowledge.
Right.
Well, this time around, anytime a subject comes up and I want to chime in, it seems like somebody beats me to it and puts it in a better way than I could have, and I thank you for that. So then I back down and I put my computer on mute. Okay.
I think Dave's asking you to unmute it for a few moments so we can hear more from you.
Yeah, because just because someone expresses the same idea you have, you may express that idea differently, or use some different vocabulary, and that will bring other people into thinking or responding to it.
Uh,
So
But
don't.
I'll tell you right off the bat here, Sensei Anderson and Sensei Raymond put things very, very well. And and I'd like to compliment them on their input.
Thank you.
But I'll chime in when I can. Okay.
Yeah. And like one of the intents of the Zoom meeting was to get people who, if it was just all Budoshin Jujitsu Sensei, it would become incredibly boring.
Mhm.
And we'd all be patting ourselves on the back all the time and saying, let's follow the all high poobah. And I'd much rather have a diversity of black belts, different martial arts, because not only are we able to discuss the differences, but we find that we have many commonalities.
Mhm.
And that's one of the intents of the Zoom meeting, is to get people with different ideas, different ways of doing things, to get together and express their thoughts, because these things come out.
Mhm.
And so if you
Well-
if for those of you this is your first or second time, if if you have a copy of the list of topics, for which we're up to 14 back again, if you see something that you'd like to add to it, add to it. It doesn't have to be jujitsu. It can just be martial arts in general.
Let me ask this.
Yeah,
I-
because the intent is to have. I'd much rather have really good topics than just talk about Budoshin Jujitsu.
Can I ask? I mean, is everybody here? Do you follow the Budoshin system, or is there somebody here from outside of that system? Because you talk about the handbook and the have you reviewed the handbook? Have you looked at this, that, the other thing? I come from a different system, and I may have my opinion, but it's not too far off from what I'm hearing here.
But that's yeah. I mean
And then there's people here who have more than one black belt, so they've learned from more than one system, largely because learning one martial art, learning one form of self-defense is not enough for most people. They want a perspective and earn a second black belt that is incredibly valuable, because it expands your knowledge exponentially. That's a powerful word, exponentially.
Absolutely.
And that's part of the reason I'm playfully, happily drawing you in, is I don't know your background, but I'm willing to bet that you've got a lot of knowledge and experience that we benefit from hearing about. What is your self-defense background? Where have you trained, and so forth? Help us understand. Help us know you better.
My background initially is in Kodokan Judo. I practiced. I practiced judo between the years of 1980 to 1994. Had to stop randori because of an injury. So that's the period of time that I practiced judo. But for the last maybe 6 months of my judo, that's the first time I actually studied judo. From a technical point of view, from a kata background. In 1989, I became involved in Zen Budokai Jujitsu. Okay, and that's the school that I'm in currently. And I've been in Zen Budokai since 1989 till the present. One thing with respect that was most recently mentioned is working on another black belt. In our system for a long time, however, this rule has become less of a rule recently, is that in order to earn a third degree black belt in our system, you had to have a black belt in another martial art. And what was stated earlier regarding how studying more than one martial art helps it exponentially. I've experienced that myself. As I've because I come from a background with judo and jujitsu, I see that they've had a synergistic effect on each other. Okay, and I find that with other people in the class. What do I call this? Before the days of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, before Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became very popular, the perception of traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu was if somebody's studying another martial art, pretty much a striking martial art, and they want to supplement it with grappling, they take Jiu-Jitsu. So we had a class of people that studied other martial arts. We had, karate people, kung fu, taekwondo. So it was a mix of martial arts, and I was one of the few judo people. And they say the same thing. These different arts, they have a synergistic effect on each other. So, that's made me appreciate jujitsu and other martial arts a lot more. Now, when I was in judo, um, maybe this was my dojo or the circle of judoka that I associated with. It was just judo. Okay. If you see somebody doing karate, okay, you take a look at that. Okay, that's nice. And you go back to randori. But I found that jujitsu is more inclusive, more interested in other martial arts because there are more people from other martial arts coming into it and learning grappling.
Okay.
Interesting.
I
I
mean-
love your use of the word synergistic.
Mhm.
That's central. That's
Yes.
powerful.
I know.
Well stated.
I found that to be accurate. Yes.
One thing when I was studying under Seki, after a couple of years, I also found out about another sensei, Harold Brocious, who was teaching Katsugo Jiu-Jitsu. And so, I talked with him and I told Seki what I was going to do. And he said, well, just remember my stand. And Hal had the same standard. What you've learned in another dojo stops at the door to this dojo. And which I respected. But Harold's Katsugo Jiu-Jitsu really filled in a lot of spots from Seki. I'm not saying anything negative about Seki, but Seki had a very polite form of Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, you had your techniques. Hal's taught, he taught the same stuff. Some of the stuff he taught looked incredibly sloppy, but it worked. You just had to become sloppy, so to speak. But he would teach things like what do we call it? Like shark bite. There are certain places you can pinch, and Thomas knows about this as and there are parts of the body that are really sensitive to touch. He taught us how to rip lips. He taught us how to bite a person properly. He said all of this is what's going to happen out on the street. You're going to run into. He taught us, how to defend ourselves in a phone booth. And one evening he got really upset, not with us, but with Pacific Bell, because they were starting to shorten the length of the phone cord between the phone apparatus and the handset to where you couldn't do anything with it anymore. But he's kind of like he also looked like Buddy Hackett, for those of you who remember who Buddy Hackett was. And he had a terrific sense of humor, that still does, but it filled in a lot of, like, as Ned said, it filled in some blank spots. It was a good mix. And and I've run some camps in the past where I would teach students how to bite properly. Okay, now if you want to know how to measure that, I said, number one, you have to think like a pit bull. Secondly, he also taught us how to defend against a dog biting you. He either worked for the Boston or Chicago Police Department for a while. But anyway, what I would do, because you have to be somewhat careful when you give students learning devices. For learning how to bite properly, I got a bunch of rolls and had their partner hold the roll up, and I said, okay, you cannot use your hands. I want you to take a bit, and I measured all the rolls to make sure they weighed about the same. And we had a competition as to who could take the biggest bite. And they would take a bite out of the roll, and that was it. And the person who got the biggest bite, of course, the roll ended up with the lowest weight. But anyway, I said, this is how you have to, if you're going to bite a person, this is how you have to bite them. You can't use human beings to test with, but a human bite is a very dangerous bite. It's going to rip out a lot of muscle. It's going to be very bloody, Of course, that's the negative side, is the blood. But he had a way of, it was a matter of putting these two different ways of doing things together. And I think that's one of the advantages of picking up things from a second martial art, is that you find where, I can use this here. And it's not going to contradict what I'm doing, my overall self-defense or kata. This becomes a kata. So, I don't know what you would name biting the roll would be called in Japanese. But, I'm sure there's a term for someone who speaks Japanese. You could call it that. But it's, and I think even if we see, all of us, if we see something that's, you look at someone from different martial art and you see something they do, you say, that's a good move. You end up using that. You ultimately end up using that in your teaching, because you realize that it's a legitimate technique, it's a legitimate move, and why can't I teach it? If we just limit ourselves to what's in the book, which doesn't matter which book, or this is all my sensei allows, sometimes you have to add stuff that your sensei does not allow, and it's not in the book. And now maybe you have a different rule, because you have a rule that's called bite the roll rule.
But say it in Japanese and then it'll sound good.
Yes, if you say it in Japanese, it'll sound good, right? As long as
in my experience in other people's experience in confrontation and my background in public health, I always said that if you're going to make a person bleed, make them bleed internally. Okay.
very good.
And that's with respect to what's out there as far as bloodborne pathogens and the potential for a person losing the fight in the long run if they were to contract one of these.
Yes. I used to, in the classroom, I'd mess with my kids' minds, because I'd say something, si ustedes no comprende Yiddish, sus mana. Which means if you don't understand Yiddish, or the Jewish language, close your mouth. Close your mouth. Sus mana is in Armenian.
Mm-hmm.
Si ustedes no comprende Yiddish, or si ustedes no comprende is Spanish. I mean, the kids thought the term was a riot.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was kind of unique to my class, except they'd pick up on the term, and then I get feedback from other teachers. What does this phrase mean? Because they wouldn't tell them. I think that, it's like putting together stuff from different martial arts. If you put stuff together from different languages, I mean, depending on where you live in the US, there's a lot of terminology that is used in some parts of the US that is not used in others. And it's amazing what you can learn even in this country. And,
Yeah, down south here, we say all y'all.
yeah, y'all.
All y'all, that's plural
All
for
y'all?
y'all. Yeah, plural
Of
for
course.
y'all is
All
all
y'all.
y'all.
Oh, yeah, right. I get it. Makes sense to me.
In Boston, they say use guys.
There you go.
Or in parts of LA, you simply say, oi. Anyway, I think at this point, high point, we should probably end because getting towards 9:30. Next time we're going to hit on teaching and learning variations and skills. And what else we got here? The regulation of jujitsu or martial arts in general. Who should be regulating them, or should someone be? And then we keys to how to get free advertising for your dojo. Which if you operate through a community service agency or a charity, like the Y or City Park Department, it's amazing what free stuff you can get. You just have to hunt for it sometimes. But it's out there, and it can save you and your dojo big bucks and maybe get you some students. Situational awareness on the street. I forget who gave us that one. I think it's Darren. They've given us that topic. How to age appropriately and with dignity as a martial artist. Because some of us are moving up there in years. And which is why I don't like the term old. I prefer the term experienced. Because I've met some quote unquote old people. To me, old is a state of mind. Anyway, so we have some good topics coming up, and if you can think of anything else, we'll add it to the list. Okay. Anyway, anybody want to have some closing thoughts before we part ways until the what's the next one in it would be March. Let me check the calendar here. Our next get together will be March 1st. That should be easy.
It can't be March 1st, George.
Why? Oh, because you're right. Yeah. Slow learner here. It would be
Is it April 5th?
April 5th. That's
Okay.
right. Can't win all the time.
Sensei Kirby,
That's it.
I'll follow up with an email to you. The link that you sent me to access the newsletter with my article in it, it doesn't function. So I'll just send you a reminder. If you can send that link to me, that would be great.
Yeah, and get my brain organized. Let me know the name of the article too, or at least the issue of the newsletter.
Will do.
Yeah. I'll just send it to you. Yeah, no problem.
Great.
Okay. Anyway, I hope you have a good rest. I hope you have a good weekend.
Thank you all.
You too.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves. It was a good group today. We had a good diversity of opinions, and hope we'll see you and a few more people next time on March 5th.
See you guys.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
There's the mouse. The mouse was ratting out on me.